today's show, we'll be focusing on nuclear weapons. The United States has about 1,900 nuclear weapons at their disposal. They're stored in some of the most safe and unimpenetrable facilities in the world. Today we'll have Donald Trump speaking on the strategic advantages of having nuclear weapons. Off to you, Trisha. It seems like we're having some technical difficulties.
We are incognito. We see everything. We know everything. We are incognito. We are a group of hacktivists using global airwaves to fight for social justice. We feel it is urgent to bring to light the true dangers of the global nuclear weapons complex.
Why have a nuclear arsenal in the first place? Even throughout the Cold War, there were strong divisions among American strategists about the purpose of nuclear weapons. Did the Americans really intend to use nuclear arms, or were they trying to deter the Soviets from using nuclear force against the US and NATO? The US answer was to build a nuclear force configured for both deterrence and nuclear warfighting. The United States tried to use its nuclear advantage to contain Soviet expansion by threatening to use nuclear force in response to almost any Soviet aggression anywhere, which was mostly desperation rather than strategy. Because they were outgunned and outmanned, the Americans threatened to respond, at times and in place of its own choosing, with nuclear arms, but did not clarify what would trigger this type of response. However, in the end, massive retaliation was an empty threat once the Soviets could respond in the same manner. The 1950s to the 1960s, both the United States and the Soviet Union diversified their strategic forces and developed long-range missiles. In the 1960s, the superpowers started burying their missiles in the ground and hiding them underwater. Survivability was key to stability. If neither side could be assured of neutralizing the other with a sudden attack, neither would risk suicide. This created the condition American strategists called mutually assured destruction. This was because there was no possible way for the U.S., along with its allies, to confront the mass superiority of the Soviet Union in Europe or Asia with basic conventional force. Both sides soon had a secure second strike capability, or the guaranteed ability to strike back after being hit first. The American position was something of a paradox. The only way to convince the USSR that we wanted no part of a nuclear war was to have a logical plan for fighting one and to maintain a credible force that could execute that plan. If war was ever underway in Europe, NATO would be forced to surrender whatever was at issue to get the Soviets to release their grip on Western Europe. Nuclear weapons provided the West with its only chance of stopping such an attack. Small, short-range weapons would be fired from everything ranging from bazookas to artillery, destroying the advancing Soviet tank armies and halting the invasion in its tracks. The goal was to convince the Soviet Union that nothing could be gained from aggression, since every scenario would lead back to a major nuclear exchange. In the present, the United States has conducted 3 reviews of its nuclear forces, in 1994, 2002, and 2010, and each time concluded that it needs to retain the triad. But does America still need long-range bombers? Should it get rid of the land-based ICBMs and move most of its missiles underwater, as some have argued? So knowing this, why does the storage of nuclear weapons present a problem? The storage of nuclear weapons presents health and environmental risks. Production, surveillance, and storage of nuclear weapons can affect the social and natural world in a large range of ways. The first and most immediate consequence of production and storage of nuclear weapons are on health. The uranium used for nuclear weapons is a natural element, and exposure can lead to health risks such as irreversible kidney damage and lung cancer. The production and storage of nuclear facilities are leading to high health risks for the workers due to exposure to dangerous toxins. The explosive components of nuclear weapons are mainly made from uranium or plutonium, both of which are radioactive elements. Exposure to high levels of radioactive elements can cause acute radiation syndrome, which refers to a combination of health effects caused by cellular degradation and damage to the DNA structure. Short-term impact of radiation exposure includes failure of the immune system and damage to the bone marrow, gastrointestinal, cardiovascular, and central nervous systems. Research has shown that individuals who are exposed to radiation during nuclear weapons production have shown higher than average incidence of cancer. Production and storage also involves highly managed waste. Nuclear waste must be confined in appropriate disposal facilities until it is no longer able to cause public health and environmental hazard. Handling of these wastes involves surface, near surface, or deep burial storage depending on how long the components of waste stay hazardous. As a consequence, even deep burial methods are not completely guaranteed, since geological disturbances, including earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and more, can possibly dislocate waste storage containers within the immense span of time needed for the radioactivity to fully subside. A follow-up step of storage is cleaning, which also involves high financial costs. Neutralizing nuclear warheads may result in irresponsible handling of nuclear waste. Nuclear waste can leak into nature, including deliberate dumping in rivers and lakes. In the U.S., many rivers have been contaminated by nuclear waste. Toxic and radioactive substances can also discharge into the soil or atmosphere through human error, careless practices, or simply bad luck. Old weapons and contaminated platforms are left rusting in anticipation of better technology and funding. For example, in Murmansk, Russia, submarines stacked with nuclear warheads are permanently anchored at great risk to the surrounding area. There is an estimated 23,000 nuclear weapons stored in 111 locations across the planet. This estimated map from the Federation of American Scientists shows the approximate locations, many of which lie close to heavily populated areas. Maintaining these facilities means having high standards for highly trained security staff, theft prevention, alarm sensors, physical barriers, health, and more. We are living under the pretense that we are safe from nuclear weapons as long as the nuclear states remain at peace. However, the storage and upkeep of nuclear facilities across the world are a deadly game of chance. Nuclear weapons haven't been in the mainstream public thought in over 2 decades. Cold War tensions and fears are merely a distant memory. Despite there being only 5 nuclear states officially signed with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, there are 8 countries in total who have nuclear weapons. The United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, France, China, India, Pakistan, and North Korea. We aren't even certain of exactly where these are kept and how well they're maintained in the facilities. Aside from the nuclear weapon states that are officially allowed to have them, there are also nuclear sharing states, which was actually prohibited by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nuclear sharing results in even more countries across the world having access to weapons. One big example is NATO, which is the North American Treaty Organization. According to them, they are maintaining freedom and security through political and military means. What this really means is, you attack one of us, you attack all of us. How does this play into the safety of the general population of the world? Countries signed onto NATO have agreed to have nuclear weapons stored on their soil, spreading out the weapons across the world. Actually storing these weapons gets into a more complicated issue of safety and storage. These countries that are barely able to follow the guidelines of the treaties they have signed onto and find loopholes when actually following them have no legally binding responsibility to make sure that safety and storage standards are up to par. Sure, countries have highly trained staff, and there are international standards by the International Atomic Energy Organization for weapons storage, and there are high levels of security measures in place for the facilities. But that did not stop one of the most highly guarded facilities in the United States from being broken into by activists. If these are all possibilities, then what's stopping us from a security slip-up that causes widespread worldwide damage? What's stopping terrorists from breaking into and stealing materials for their own use? We are just as close to nuclear war as we ever were, and the continued existence of the nuclear weapons on this planet is merely creating danger, debt, and tension. Nuclear bombs, the most dangerous threat to the world's existence, should have the most regulated and intelligent security. Think again. Who should we trust? The International Atomic Energy Agency? The IAEA's role in nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear safety measures are voluntarily adopted by individual countries or regions. In fact, the IAEA's own Director General openly stated about the Fukushima accident on March 21, 2011, that IAEA was not a nuclear watchdog.
The accident, I have tried to address some widespread misconceptions in the media about the IAEA's role in nuclear safety. These misunderstandings fueled some criticism of the agency's response, which was not always justified. I explained that we are not a nuclear safety watchdog and that Responsibility for nuclear safety lies with our member states. The IAEA acts as a hub for international cooperation.
Who is the most powerful country in the world?
The United States of America is the most powerful nation on earth. Period. Period. It's not even close.
During the Cold War, the United States built approximately 70,000 nuclear warheads, more than all other nuclear weapon states combined. And who has the authority over all these mass destruction weapons? One man and his nuclear football.
It's the nightmare scenario that every president and his chief of staff must face. The possibility of activating the football, the briefcase equipped with codes for launching a nuclear attack.
We're allowing our safety to be put in the hands of one man, a man not intensely trained in military or nuclear attacks.
There are many foreign nuclear bases which possess dangers to the health of those who maintain them and more drastically hold the risk for nuclear weapon accidents, also known as broken arrows. These accidents include near explosions, accidental detonations, and even lost nuclear weapons. However, what if the potential for these types of accidents were much closer to home than one would initially think? No nuclear weapons have been officially based in Canada since 1984, when U.S. Genie air-to-air missiles were returned to the United States from their storage sites at Canadian air bases. However, in 1985, a former commander of an American nuclear submarine said that nearly all U.S. Navy vessels arriving in Halifax carry nuclear weapons. Quote, "There's a tremendous amount of nuclear weapons moving in and out of Canada," end quote, said Captain James Bush. Unlike the U.S. Army and Air Force, the Navy has been known to refuse to comment on whether its vessels are carrying nuclear weapons. He was further quoted saying that 12 to 15 nuclear-capable vessels visited Halifax each year in the mid-1980s, which spent a combined total of 272 ship days. Visiting U.S. destroyers carry Tomahawk cruise missiles on deck that can easily be targeted by terrorist groups. Each missile carries a 200 kilotons warhead. The bomb that destroyed Hiroshima was 13 kilotons. Furthermore, Captain James Bush also criticized the training of the crew in handling these types of weapons, stating that the training is not nearly as good as it should be. This means that there are U.S. vessels in Canadian harbors that may potentially be holding nuclear weapons, without the Canadian government being given knowledge of which vessels are carrying them. But this only occurred in the 1980s, right? Wrong. To this day, the U.S. Navy gives no information whatsoever to Canada, and still goes by the policy of neither confirming or denying the presence of nuclear weapons on its ships. As a sovereign country, the Canadian government has a right to know when these weapons are within its borders, in order to attempt to alleviate all the risks that are associated with nuclear storage. Most importantly, the government should reject any vessel that holds these weapons, instead of risking a nuclear disaster bigger than Chernobyl right in the middle of a large Canadian city.
On June 12, 1982, 1 million people gathered in New York City's Central Park for a demonstration against nuclear weapons, calling for an end to the Cold War arms race. It was the largest political demonstration in the history of the United States. So what is still standing in the way of nuclear disarmament? Since the 1950s, anti-nuclear movements have taken place, and today there are a number of nuclear disarmament groups such as the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, Peace Action, Greenpeace, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and Global Zero, amongst others. However, these groups have not been able to accomplish much on the front of nuclear disarmament.
No more nukes! No more nukes! No more nukes! No more nukes! No more nukes!
Aside from movements and groups, governments around the world are quickly realizing that it is just as expensive and dangerous to continue storing these weapons. As a result, there have been a number of treaties which have come into existence, beginning with the INF Treaty in the late 80s, and later the START 1 Treaty. START 1 was a nuclear reduction treaty between Russia and the US and was later superseded by the New START Treaty in 2010. Under the terms of the treaty, the number of nuclear missile launchers will be reduced by half. While this treaty focuses on limiting the number of deployed warheads, other agreements such as the Plutonium Disposition and Management Agreement between Russia and the US focus on actually disarming and disposing of old nuclear weapons like the Fat Man. Plutonium disposal can happen in two ways. The first is to consume the plutonium in reactors or accelerators through conversion into mixed oxide fuel. The U.S. has been investing money into creating facilities where this takes place, such as the Savannah River plant in South Carolina. It is designed to blend the excess plutonium with uranium oxide and make mixed oxide, which can be used as fuel in some U.S. commercial reactors. The other option for disposing of plutonium is to immobilize the plutonium into a waste form and store it permanently, most likely through vitrification. The first option is the only conclusion that actually satisfies the conditions of the treaty. This is still a very expensive and slow-moving process. Where costs for the Manhattan Project were around $21.6 billion, today it would cost more just to get rid of 37.5 tons of the excess it produced. In 2002, the U.S. Energy Department decided to build a waste treatment and immobilization plant. The cost was initially estimated at $4.3 billion with the 2011 completion date. After review in 2011, it was determined that the cost had tripled and was given a new 2019 completion date. The options for nuclear disarmament continue to be very limited despite the advocacy from groups and even different government policies that have come into play since the end of the Cold War. Disarming, disposing, or even the dismantling of nuclear weapons is extremely expensive. The U.S. government alone struggles to get disposal projects underway and to meet the conditions of the various treaties they have signed.
First atomic bomb was dropped.
80,000 people died within the hour.